You are not a leader because you achieved something. You are a leader because you endured something. Something no one saw, but that fractured you in silence while everyone admired your supposed strength. It's easy to believe that leaders are born with some kind of gift, a pre-installed mental clarity or a supernatural hunger for power. But Nietzsche understood better than anyone that this is an illusion. The truth is darker, more human, and infinitely harder. True leaders are forged on the anvil of inner chaos, and right there, in that exact place, they become capable of creating new worlds. It is necessary to have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star. When Nietzsche said this, he was pointing straight at that moment of rupture you know all too well, that instant when everything feels like it's about to fall apart, and instead of retreating, you have to choose to face something devastating. That breaking point you've tried so many times to avoid, that is the very moment where true leadership is carved out. Not in books, not in overpriced workshops, but in that emotional fracture where you realize the old values no longer serve you, where the inherited morality from your parents or from society begins to suffocate rather than liberate. It's in this silent war against the morality of the slave that true leadership rises, rebellious and inevitable. In the midst of chaos, you learn that much of what you were taught to call virtue is often nothing more than a way to keep genuine potential chained down. The very potential that could transform you and everything around you. There's an invisible, constant tension between the deep fear of your own will and the longing to command yourself without apology. Because deep down, every leader knows that before they can conquer any external territory, they must first face the chaos that secretly governs them. Have you noticed that most people live in a permanent theater? They display perfect smiles, rehearse their speeches well, but they hide a blade of intention behind their backs. Machiavelli warned that mastering appearances is essential, but that doesn't mean becoming a prisoner of them. The true leader is not the one who hides their weaknesses best. It's the one who faces each of them without flinching, without compromise. Jung would call this confronting your own shadow, that inner tyrant that lives quietly in the darkest corners of your mind, waiting for the slightest distraction to take over. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Chaos is not your enemy. It is your raw material. It is your most powerful tool, as long as you know how to wield it. Authentic leaders don't eliminate chaos. They tame it, turning it into something that serves them, not the other way around. Chaos is the anvil, pain the hammer, and you, if you accept the challenge, are the blacksmith shaping your own mind. Now you must choose. Keep running from the storm that already lives in your life, or take the first step toward the true power that rises precisely from that disorder. Let's find out together, now. It's tempting to believe that the pursuit of power always begins with strength, but look closer, and you'll see something far more complex, something few have the courage to admit. The hunger for power often begins as a silent attempt to cover up a hidden fragility. That quiet, gnawing sense of insignificance that no one talks about. The kind of fear, but us, that lives beneath even the most confident mask. When Nietzsche wrote about the will to power, he wasn't speaking of those who seek to control the world as a way to compensate for their own emptiness. He was speaking of those who first dare to command themselves, who refuse to let that inner fragility dictate the course of their lives. Think about the leaders the world admires, their polished speeches, their commanding presence. But behind that image, how many of them are fighting a private war, terrified that without the applause, without the titles, without the illusion of strength, they might be exposed as nothing? The archetype of the leader so often begins as a mask, a carefully shaped persona designed not for the world, but for the person wearing it. It's protection against that terror of the inner void, a shield raised against the chaos that threatens to reveal itself when the applause fades. And so the leader builds structures, systems, empires, but more than anything, walls. Walls high enough to keep the chaos out, thick enough to muffle the silence that grows louder the more they try to dominate the external world. Because power sought as compensation is a fragile power. It looks solid, it commands attention, but beneath it, there's a brittleness that no amount of conquest can truly hide. And the one who leads to escape themselves finds that the further they go, the more lost they become in their own illusion. Nietzsche's will to power was never about this theater. It was never about bending others to your will as a way of avoiding the hard work of self-mastery. But that's where many lose their way. They confuse external conquest with internal strength. They seek to lead, to dominate, to command, not realizing they're still servants of masters they've never seen. The craving for validation, the legacy of a family's expectations, the invisible chains of inherited morality. And so they march forward, certain they're in control, when in truth, they're being led by forces they refuse to confront. This is the tragedy that few will name. What looks like strength is often just a shield. What looks like leadership is sometimes only fear in disguise. And the more someone tries to control everything around them, the more obvious it becomes that they are not free. The leader who seeks power as compensation for inner weakness will forever be enslaved by what they run from. But here lies the turning point, the revelation most avoid. True power begins the moment you stop running. The moment you stop building walls to hold back your own chaos and start using that chaos as the raw material to forge yourself. Only then does leadership become real. Not as domination over others, but as sovereignty over yourself. Power built on compensation crumbles. Power built on self-confrontation endures. If this speaks to something you felt but struggled to name, then I invite you to stay on this path with me. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, not out of habit, but because what we're building here is a space for truth, not performance. A space where leadership is not about pretending, but about the courage to face what's real. There's more to uncover, and I'd be honored to have you with me on this journey. Power in its purest form is quiet. It doesn't need applause, doesn't seek permission, doesn't crave validation. And yet, what we see so often in those who reach for it is something else entirely, a performance. A distortion of what Nietzsche meant when he spoke of the will to power. The will to power was never meant to be about dominating others as a way of proving strength. It was meant to describe the relentless force within that compels a person to rise above themselves, to shape, to create, to master what no one else can see, their own chaos. But how often that force is twisted into something else, a desperate attempt to command the external world as a way of avoiding the more brutal, more necessary task of commanding the self. When a person confuses outward conquest with inner mastery, they step onto a path that feels powerful, but is hollow at its core. From the outside, it looks convincing. They lead, they take, they control. But underneath the victories and the titles lies a truth they would rather not face. That much of what drives them is not their own will, but the will of invisible masters. Expectations, moral codes inherited without question, the lingering need to be seen and approved by the very world they think they're above. What appears as strength is often a fragile structure, built carefully, desperately, to keep doubt and fear from breaking through. The leader rises, but the foundation remains weak because it was built not on authenticity, but on avoidance. There's a danger in this kind of power. A danger not just for those who follow, but for the leader themselves. Because every conquest, every victory achieved without first confronting the inner ground on which it rests becomes another layer of illusion. The more they command, the more they are commanded. The more they conquer, the more they are conquered by forces they refuse to name. They move forward with certainty, but each step is dictated by voices they've never questioned. The family legacy that tells them what success should mean, the silent codes of a society that punishes true rebellion, the deep fear of stepping outside the lines that have been drawn for them since before they could choose. This is how power becomes theater. The leader begins to act, not lead. They become a performer on a stage built by the expectations of others, speaking lines they didn't write, playing a role they didn't choose. And the world applauds, not seeing that what they're cheering is a kind of invisible surrender. The tragedy is not that the leader commands others. The tragedy is that in doing so, they often stop commanding themselves. They become a prisoner of the very image they project, unable to break free without risking the collapse of everything they've built. But authentic leadership asks for something harder, something most will avoid their entire lives. It asks the leader to stop looking outward for validation, for control, for approval. It demands that they turn inward and face places where they are still ruled by what they refuse to examine. It demands that they question the moral scripts handed to them, the silent agreements they've made with a world that fears true power. Only when that confrontation begins can the will to power become what Nietzsche envisioned, not a mask worn for the sake of the crowd, but a force that creates, that destroys, that gives birth to new values, new paths, new ways of being that no one else dared to imagine. There is an invisible trap that waits for those who aspire to lead, a trap so subtle, so deeply woven into the fabric of society that most never even see it. It is the trap of moral domestication. The leader begins their journey believing they are breaking free, charting their own course, rising above the herd. And yet, without realizing it, they often become the most obedient servant of all. Not to a single ruler, but to the collective morality designed to keep the strong weak, the bold tamed, the dangerous safe for the world to handle. Nietzsche saw this with terrifying clarity. He warned of the moralities invented by the powerless, designed not to elevate the individual, but to chain them, to make sure no one dares to rise too far, think too freely, or create too wildly. And so many who believe they are leading are in fact serving. They follow the unspoken rules of what it means to be good, to be right, to be acceptable. They act with kindness not because they have chosen it, but because they have been trained to fear the consequences of true power. The tragedy is that this goodness, when not rooted in strength, breeds something dark, silent resentment. The leader becomes the martyr, the one who sacrifices their own vision, their own will, their own potential on the altar of being seen as virtuous by a world that punishes authenticity when it feels threatening. They wear their goodness like armor, but that armor is made of expectations that were never theirs to begin with. Look closely at the so-called good leader, and you may see someone who is quietly suffocating under the weight of that armor. They serve the group. They serve the idea of decency handed to them by traditions they never questioned. And in doing so, they betray the wild, untamed force that could have made them true creators of new worlds. They fear stepping beyond the moral boundaries drawn by the collective, because to do so would mean risking isolation, misunderstanding, and the terrifying freedom that comes with no longer belonging to the herd. And so they stay. They lead, but only within the lines that others have drawn. The moral codes that shape these leaders are not neutral. They were crafted, often unconsciously, by generations seeking to control what they feared. The bold, the dangerous, the powerful, they are always threats to the established order. And so morality becomes a tool to tame them, to turn their strength inward, to make them question their own right to exist as they are. Nietzsche's critique of the good man was not an attack on kindness or generosity. It was a warning against the kind of goodness that exists only because true strength has been denied, repressed, or shamed. A goodness born from weakness breeds poison in the soul. It fosters a quiet, corrosive bitterness that eats away at the leader's will until nothing remains but duty, obligation, and silent despair. Authentic leadership demands a rebellion, not against people, but against these inherited scripts. It requires the courage to question the morality that was handed down like a chain disguised as a gift. It asks the leader to see where they have been tamed, where they have been made safe for the world, and to decide if that safety is worth the price of their own becoming. The leader who dares to break this trap does not become cruel or heartless. They become real. And in that reality, they gain the only power that matters, the power to create values, laws, and meanings that are their own, not borrowed, not inherited, not imposed. Destruction frightens most people. They see it as a force that only tears down, that only leaves ruin in its wake. But those who seek to lead in truth, those who understand the raw mechanics of power, know that destruction is not always the enemy. Sometimes, destruction is creation in its purest, most honest form. This is the paradox that terrifies the moral herd and liberates the authentic leader. Chaos, when consciously chosen, is not a threat. It is a tool. A necessary fire that clears the dead wood, that makes space for what has never existed before. And so the leader must learn the art of selective chaos, not destruction for its own sake, but destruction that serves a purpose, that opens a door where there was only a wall. The leader who fears chaos, who clings to inherited structures, inherited meanings, inherited codes, becomes a caretaker of the past. They preserve what is already dead, mistaking obedience for integrity, mistaking stagnation for stability. But true leadership begins when the leader dares to disobey. Not the world outside, not simply the laws of others, but the deeper, more dangerous laws they have carved into their own minds. The orders they inherited without question, the beliefs they never dared to challenge, the inner rules that dictate what they can desire, what they can dream, what they can become. It is this internal disobedience that marks the moment when destruction turns to creation. When the leader stops tending to the graveyards of old ideas and begins to build something alive, something that breathes with their own will. There is a kind of power in knowing how to let things fall apart, in understanding that not every structure is worth preserving, that not every approval is worth chasing. This is not about ruling others. It is about the far more dangerous, far more necessary task of ruling the inner world, where chaos, doubt, and inherited guilt have long built empires of their own. The image of the leader as the creator of their internal kingdom is not just a symbol, it is a demand. Because to lead authentically means to legislate over the one territory no one else can govern for you, the landscape of your own mind. This is where most falter. They mistake the voices within, the voice of guilt, the voice of inherited sin, the voice of the inner priest, for their own conscience. They follow these voices as if they were sacred laws, never daring to question their origin, never daring to ask whose benefit they truly serve. And so they live as subjects, not sovereigns. They obey the rules carved into them by forces they never chose, by moralities designed not to elevate, but to control. The true leader begins where this obedience ends. They begin when they dare to put these voices on trial, to see the inner priest for what it is, a remnant of systems meant to tame, to shrink, to keep the dangerous brilliance of the individual safely contained. To rule your inner world is to embrace the practice of exile, not exile from the world, but from the persona you've built to survive it. It means stepping outside the character you've played so well, the mask that gained you praise, protection, perhaps even love. And in that exile, you face what the persona was built to hide: the shadow, the parts of you that frighten, that shame, that threaten the order you inherited. Jung understood this with clarity. Leadership begins when you stop projecting that shadow onto others and start integrating it. The tyrant you feared in the world was always waiting in the dark corners of your own mind. To govern yourself is to face that tyrant without flinching, and to refuse to let it rule in secret any longer. The leader as architect of their own law does not mean lawlessness. It means creation, the forging of principles, values, and codes that are chosen, not imposed. It means the death of the inner priest, not because conscience is abandoned, but because true conscience is born only when it is no longer confused with inherited fear. The leader who reaches this point understands that guilt is not proof of wrongdoing. Often, guilt is simply the echo of the chains being loosened. And to walk forward despite it, to build despite it, is the act that separates the sovereign from the subject. This is the path of the leader who no longer seeks to belong at any cost, who no longer bends their will to fit into the molds offered by family, by society, by the past. This is the leader who understands that to build a true inner kingdom, the first step is to tear down the ruins of the one given to them. Not in anger, not in blind destruction, but in the clarity that what was inherited was never truly theirs. And what will be built must arise from choice, not from fear. Picture the process of forging a sword. The metal is not born sharp, strong, or resilient. It begins as raw, unformed material, beaten under relentless heat, fractured and reshaped again and again. This is no different from the mind of a true leader. The leader's mind is not gifted whole or perfect. It is forged through fire, through failure, through the hammering blows of conflict and loss. Strength does not arrive fully made. It emerges, piece by painful piece, as the leader learns to endure the heat of their own contradictions, the breaking of illusions they once called truth, the fracture points where what was weak must give way so something stronger can take its place. The leader who seeks comfort, who tries to preserve the shape they were given, will never be more than what they were handed by the world. Because forging requires destruction. The raw material must break to be shaped. The blade must endure the hammer to gain its edge. And so must the mind of the leader pass through fire and fracture, not once, but again and again. Every failure becomes a strike of the hammer. Every moment of despair becomes the heat that softens the metal so it can be shaped. What feels like ruin is, in truth, the moment of creation, if the leader has the courage to stay in the forge. Many seek to avoid this process. They want the strength without the heat, the edge without the fracture, the authority without the pain that forges it. But what emerges from such avoidance is brittle. It shatters under pressure. It cannot cut through the challenges that demand more than borrowed courage or second-hand wisdom. The leader who refuses the forge remains untested, unsharpened, unready. Their power is surface deep, their resolve unproven. And in the moment of true trial, it is not enough. The forge of leadership is not a single event. It is ongoing. Each conflict, each loss, each harsh truth faced is another round in the fire. But another opportunity for the blade to be made stronger, the mind clearer, the will sharper. And the fracture points, those moments where something within seems to break, are not signs of failure. They are the places where new edges are formed, where the leader learns to cut through illusion, through pretense, through the easy answers that no longer suffice. The leader who emerges from this process does not claim perfection. They claim readiness. They claim resilience, because they have been broken, shaped, reforged, and they stand not because they were spared from pain, but because they allowed it to transform them. The image of the swordsmith is not just metaphor, it is instruction. The mind of the leader is the blade. The fire is the conflict they cannot avoid. The hammer is the pressure, the failure, the loss that strikes without mercy. And the leader, if they endure, becomes not what the world handed them, but what they have made of themselves, piece by piece, scar by scar. We did it. The merger is finally complete, and our vision is becoming reality. But with great power comes even greater responsibility. Are we truly ready for what's ahead? With an edge honed by truth, not comfort. True leadership is not given, it is earned in the forge. It is built in the moments no one sees, when the leader chooses to stay in the heat, to accept the hammer's blow, to let the fracture teach them where they were weak and where they can become strong. There is a weight carried by those who choose to lead themselves before they ever try to lead anyone else. It is not a crown of gold, nor a title given by others. It is the silent crown, the one forged in the fire of self-confrontation, shaped by the courage to face what most spend their lives avoiding. This crown is not visible to the world. It doesn't draw applause. It draws responsibility. Jung understood this when he spoke of the leader who integrates their shadow, the one who does not cast their darkness onto others, blaming, shaming, or attacking, but who accepts that darkness as part of what must be carried in order to be whole. To wear this crown is to accept the weight of everything you once denied in yourself, and to carry it with integrity, even when no one sees. Nietzsche's vision of the true leader, the creator of values, the one who steps beyond the morality of the herd, was never about gaining power for its own sake. It was about the duty that comes with becoming the source of your own law, the builder of meaning where meaning has been lost. The leader who dares to walk this path accepts a kind of solitude that few can bear. Because to lead in this way means no longer seeking shelter in the approval of the crowd. It means no longer asking the world to tell you who you are, or what is right, or where to go. It means taking on the responsibility of shaping that path yourself, step by step. No one else can do it for you. It means learning to live without the safety of borrowed truths, without the comfort of inherited values, without the illusion that someone else will give you the answers. This kind of leadership does not offer comfort. It offers clarity. And in that clarity, there is strength. Not the strength of domination over others, but the strength of standing firmly within yourself, unmoved by the shifting winds of public opinion, unshaken by the silence that often meets true integrity. The leader who wears this silent crown understands that what matters is not how many see it, but that they know it is there, that they know the weight they carry is real, that they have chosen it freely. They understand that this crown will not make life easier, but it will make it true. To walk this path is to accept that there will be moments of doubt, moments when the burden feels too great, when the silence feels too deep. But those moments are part of the price of freedom. Because real freedom, the freedom to create your own law, to forge your own meaning, can never be given by others. It can only be claimed by those who are willing to pay its cost. The cost of responsibility, of solitude, of facing oneself without illusion. And so, the final question remains. Are you willing to accept the weight of this crown? The crown that marks not outward victory, but inner sovereignty? The crown that demands nothing from the world, but everything from you? If this reflection speaks to you, if you see in these words something that resonates with your own search for clarity and strength, I invite you to join this journey. Subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and let's continue building this space together. A space where leadership means responsibility, where truth matters more than image, and where no one walks this harder path alone. Together, we explore not the performance of leadership, but its reality. The silent work, the invisible crown, the unseen victories that shape the person who dares to lead themselves before they ever try to lead the world.